impression that these photographs weren't taken 12 days before the attack, but were in fact taken the day after the attack, the day I spotted them on my boss's desk. And by the way, quite I forgot to mention there, I may never have seen these photographs if I hadn't actually seen them on my boss's desk. I don't think she would recognise my target. It could have just gone into a file, and I might never have seen it, basically. So they changed the report. So what do you do in those circumstances? How do you reform the intelligence services? And by the way, I did check to my boss. I said, look, there's been a mistake in this brief, should we correct this? Of course, no, he made me deliberately done this to see what he said. And he told me to keep quiet. But that's what happened in MI5 when you asked questions. And that just shows, I think, how they allow attacks to happen. It's not just that. It's, for example, in 1993, they let a Libyan terrorist into Britain. A Libyan terrorist had a record for working with Sinn Féin and the IRA and so on. It later transpired that he'd been gun running. And yet MI6 wanted this guy in the country because they thought they could recruit him. Of course, they made no progress in this regard. And you don't have to believe me on this one either. You can have to believe the person who wrote the letter recommending his expulsion. The person in MI5 who wanted this terrorist finally expelled said in that letter to government, this man has set up a terrorist network which, if the Libyans wish to resume violence against us, can be used. Now, the reason you know this again, of course, is because this document was leaked onto the internet. In my case, despite all the things I've said about innocent people dying and being unable to stop attacks, they have not ever taken my evidence, whether in government or in parliament. They're the kind of people who will turn around and call you a traitor or whatever, without bothering to do what anybody with a modicum of intelligence should do, and that is take information from all interested parties. But time and time again we've seen in my case that when you do use the injunction Annie was talking about, this temporary injunction, in which we submit stories to the authorities in good faith, they use it against us. The first time it happened, I was blowing the whistle on the fact that MI5 was in possession of reliable intelligence indicating the Israeli embassy was going to be bombed. But the officer in question did nothing to stop it. In fact, there's another example of false flag terrorism. The officer, I saw another document by an officer, senior officer, G91 was his number, I don't remember his name, who said he thought on the available evidence that the Israelis had bombed their own embassy. It seemed that extraordinary that they would do that in July 1994 in London. And yet when we look at the other circumstances of the bombing, no one injured. The one camera that would have recorded the car coming in with a bomb is not working that day. And let's bear in mind how paranoid the Israelis are about security. And indeed, why we believe the Israelis bombed their own embassy was because they wanted increased security around it after an attack on the Jewish interest section in Buenos Aires earlier in 1994. So it's doubly suspicious that camera wasn't working. And then, of course, we have to have the patsies, like Lee Harvey Oswald, the Kennedy assassination, or the 19 hijackings, or the so-called four suicide bombers in 7/7. In this particular case, we believe on the available evidence that Mossad framed two innocent Palestinians. It's not good enough just to carry out a false flag operation. You've got to have individuals you can blame for this to convince the public that they are responsible. And what happened in this case is the two who were prominent Palestinian protesters in London. This is a great way for Mossad to frame these two, get them in prison, but also handicap the kind of abilities of the Palestinian community in London to fight for themselves and lobby the British government. And they did this by having an agent, someone called Raymond Graby, who connected the two, and made sure that they were always in the wrong place at the wrong time from the point of view of the suspicion. So they were actually convicted by a jury of conspiracy to cause those explosions, even though they actually had alibis for the day of the attack, because it was conspiracy, they didn't actually prove they were involved. But again, this gives you some sort of idea about what the intelligence services do. They withheld two documents from the court hearing. So we're not talking here about documents that have been PII, subject of gagging orders by judges. The judge never got as far as considering whether this material should be kept from the defence. Now clearly, because all the material was circumstantial against them, there was no smoking gun, no evidence of them touching explosives, for example. When you have two other reports, one saying may have been the Iranians, who appears to be an Iranian group, or a reporter. Again, that might be misinformation put into Mossad, but it's MI5 by Mossad. Or you have those senior MI5 officers saying, I think the Iranians did it themselves, an opinion based on evidence which is disclosable. It is untenable to think the jury would not come to a different conclusion, considering the standard of criminal proof is beyond reasonable doubt. The very fact that senior MI5 officer on his expert analysis of the evidence says the Israelis carried it out themselves would, I would think, create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. But this is it. So to carry on this false flag stuff, they need the complicity, not just of the intelligence services, but also key people in government, to be able to hide documents like this. And one of these documents, you might think sometimes, I thought this to start with, perhaps this was just an accident. But then you realise that 8 people had been copied this document. 8 people failed to disclose it. That is not a coincidence. That's not just incompetence. That is strategic corruption to prevent 2 people from getting a fair trial. Now, I don't want to talk too much about 9/11. I'm going to give you a flavour of the background there and what is the why issue of false flag terrorism. Which is saying, ranges, I believe, from the idea of letting attacks like the IRA attacks happen, make it possible for attacks by having a Libyan terrorist in the country and allowing them in. Or, as they did in Afghanistan, or as Andy mentioned earlier on, the assassination attempt on Colonel Gaddafi, they actually pay people to carry out operations. MI6 does not carry out these operations itself. And we'd be foolish to think that it does, because if they got caught, the implications would be enormous. They have to have cutouts or surrogates to create this gap for what they call deniability, plausible